Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I am your host, Justin, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about lowering the barrier of entry to getting started with Angular. We're going to do a discussion show, so it should be pretty good. We've got a returning guest that we're always excited to have, and a new guest, so we're looking forward to that. Let's say hi to our panelists first, and then we'll say hi to our guests.
Can
and we might have a couple.
First panelist?
You what?
I want to be the first panelist introduced.
You totally can be the first. By rule of logic, you're the only panelist right now. So bingo, you win. So Mike, what's going on, Mike?
Not too much. Excited to have a discussion show, just chatting about a topic. A broad topic too, which is cool. I'm excited.
Yeah. Should be good for sure. All right, and let's say hi to our guest. We've got a new guest, Chandler. Chandler's joining us. Chandler, how's it going?
Going good. Thank y'all for having me.
Yeah, for sure. I'll ask you to tell our viewers a bit about yourself, but let me introduce the other guest too, and then both of you can tell our viewers. Tracy's joining us again. Tracy, how's it going? Oh, I think
I've missed y'all. So good to see everyone.
Yes, it was very good to see. Yeah, not only haven't had you on for a while, but communication's been rough. Everybody's been in this whole, everything, so many things going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, why don't we give our viewers a little bit about both of you, if you want to tell our viewers a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'll go first. So, hi, I'm Chandler. I'm a software engineer at this dot. And previously, I actually worked at a tire shop as an auto mechanic. So I swapped fields. So this, what we're talking about today is really been on my mind lately. It's something I'm super passionate about. So.
Nice.
And my name's Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at Lady Leet. I'm the CEO of a company called This Dot Labs. I'm also a Google developer expert for Angular. And oh my gosh, I've been so busy this past year. We've grown so much here at This Dot. We're a team of about 50 developers now. And we have oh my gosh, so much Angular and React work. So we're definitely hiring. If you want to come work with a growing team and just come hang out, feel free to email me or tweet at me anytime. My Twitter handle is on display here at Lady Lee.
Awesome. Wait, did you say around 50 developers?
Yeah, it's been crazy. Yeah, and it's so crazy. The past 2 months, we hired 14 new people, I think it is. And I'm just oh my God, I need to hire 5 more. So, definitely apply. I think it's we're just looking for good people, really. So, I think that's a huge thing when, hire people looking for jobs, right? Look for the right fit of the people versus trying to apply for a job, and you'd be surprised because, if somebody likes you, then maybe we'll be friends and work together. But, nice. I'm also excited about, something that we've been doing lately. So we host contributor days, which we started so long ago. I think the first Angular contributor days was back in 2017 at NGConf. And we just hosted one, actually, Angular contributor days very recently. And it was such great conversation with the Angular core team. And we're doing State of Angular in just a few weeks with, Angular team has really kind of revamped themselves and have a lot of new talent. So it's really great. If you want to come meet some fresh new faces, they're going to be doing a really cool panel for State of Angular.
Nice. Yeah, I know time flies. I mean, just on its own, right? But it does just feel like This Dot just got started recently, right? I remember when you started that up and going down that venture. And so, wow, to be that large and it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, I remember first meeting you, Justin. I met you at, what was that conference called? It was Angular something. And it was in Burlingame, or it was in the Bay Area, in the middle somewhere. Not Burlingame.
Yeah. Was it San Jose or something? Yeah. I can't remember where it was at. Yeah.
You had your whole team there.
Yeah. It was a long time ago.
Right?
Yeah.
2015, 2016, something like that.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, pretty exciting to see that journey of what you've done with that company and everybody there. It's amazing. That's cool.
Thank you.
Hey, Alyssa's here. Let's bring Alyssa on and we can say hi to her.
Yay.
Hey, Alyssa.
Sorry for joining late. The Bay had a late morning.
We're glad you're here. We're glad you're here. Sounds like you're distant a little bit. Is the mic?
Oh, let me double check. I probably.
Yeah.
That's not confusing at all for me. It's like I'm the
Oh, is that-
cause of her audio issues.
There we go.
Nice. So listen, to catch you up real quick, we just introduced our guest. We've been talking a little bit about this dot and the history of it, but we're going to be talking about our topic of the entry to Angular and getting started with Angular and what that's like and what that journey is and how that's changing and improving. And yeah, that's our topic for today.
Beautiful. I'm super excited to talk about it. And welcome, Chandler and Tracy.
I think that's something that needs to be talked about more, because as people who have been involved in Angular for quite so long, you have a tendency to gravitate more towards the advanced topics or dig deeper into something in particular. But you also at the same time don't want to forget about the larger community of how you can shepherd more people into the ecosystem as well. So excited to
That's huge too. Yeah, I mean, I've always, why is it that a lot of boot camps choose, or at least a majority of boot camps that I know of, choose React, right? Like, is it because of the onboarding experience and the ease of onboarding compared to Angular? Although I'm kind of biased too, because Angular was my second love. Ember was my first. So I always found Angular super easy to do. And I'm just like, well, of course it's easy. Like, why is it difficult? But I know, Chandler, you had some opinions about this. And I know, Alyssa, you're doing something at NGConf related to this too. So
Yeah, so like what I tell people, and so like I'll kind of use the analogy of like the kitchen, right? So like people say Angular is everything in the kitchen sink, right? So like if you use that same metaphor and you apply it, like, so say I just want to make some toast, right? So React's pretty easy to get started with, right? We can throw some JSX, get a component out there and render it. Angular, you have some more hoops to jump through. So I think part of that is the breadth and how much comes with Angular. People kind of get overwhelmed, and I kind of tell people, you don't learn React and React Router and a form library and RxJS all at the same time. You learn how to put a component on the screen and then you go from there. So.
And
Yeah.
in that regard, there's a lot of similarities between the two. You have a CLI to scaffold up an application, and you have a starting ground. Whether or not that's just a React component or whether or not it's your app component within Angular. I know other things get generated along with that, but you have one place where you can start to go and make changes and see those changes appear on the screen in real time. So it's just a matter of getting your mental focus, or even the teacher driving you there, to get to get you to that point where you're making that changes in that one place. Focus on that, not all these other files that are sitting there, because there's, I don't know, 50, 100 other files that get generated. Just look at this one file, start here, and then you can expand out to the breadth that you touched on as well.
if we look at the CLIs, so CLIs, I mean, there's so many these days, right? But the idea of setting up your dev environment for you, and kind of out of the box performance and some of these other things, like, is Angular CLI way better for beginners because it provides so much more and abstracts away so much more complexity than something a little bit more lightweight like the React ecosystem has?
Yeah, the fact that you can do like an ng generate component is like super helpful, right? And And I don't know. I don't know. I know React doesn't have that, but does Vue can Vue scaffold any kind of code for you or?
Yes, it does as well. I don't know if I wonder if Vue does Vue generate. I can't remember because it's been a second since I've played around with it. But you know, it's all very similar though. I mean, I think that's why I love being a beginner, you know, in this day and age, and kind of having people focus so much on the experience, because it's so much easier than it was back in, God, before, I would say like before 2015. Like before 2015 was a good year.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is, as we talk about the CLI, is if we can go even lower than that, and it's a good discussion point to think about the fact that, like, why do we need a CLI, right? And why is that there, right? And when we talk about Angular and React and things like that, at least when we're talking about Angular, we're talking about a single page application, right? And this concept of, like, we're deploying a JavaScript framework that's going to act like a application. Versus, say, like, if I was just going to create a web page and I created a form on it, right? From the basic level, I could create an HTML page, right? I could write some HTML inside that page and then find a way to serve that page and be up and running, right? But in order to do that within Angular or these sort of things, we need this concept of building the JavaScript, bundling it, serving it, having some way for those JavaScript files to be referenced, having it some way to, like, bootstrap and start it up. Like, all that's there because of the fact that we're talking about the world that we're living in of a single page app, right? And I think maybe that's some of the things that get lost in that discussion, especially with Mike, when you talk about the fact, like, we get so used to living in this world that we forget that factor. So when somebody new maybe comes in and thinks, I just want to build a form, or I just want to display a piece of text. I mean, I went and I learned HTML and CSS. Shouldn't that be pretty straightforward? It's like this other part is the part that kind of adds that complexity, right?
Yeah, that's such a great point. It's really complex to build an app these days, right? And the more we iterate on top of the platform, the more complex it'll get in the future too. So, like, how can we bring all that back? Right. How can we make it simple? So.
And I see that as, like, when I think about something like Angular and say, could we get to a point where you could say, okay, just start writing this component and then you can see it on the screen. And, like, you don't have to do anything else. It's as simple as just write your component and do this. Like, can you simplify that? And I feel like those are things that could be attained because we simplified a lot of things with the CLI, right? We're already used to building tooling and things like that. So, but this discussion that we're having is, what does that story look like? Like, what do you need to do to help people out? And then from there, use that as your guiding light to say, what do we build to get them there, right?
I think that CLIs are great, but they may not be the best introductory tool. We actually just had a discussion with a team that's providing a different alternative to that, and that's the browser-based solution with something like StackBlitz, where forget about, oh, you have to install Node and you have to install Git and you have to get all these other things set up. No, hey, click this link, select what you want to try and do, and do it right there in the browser. No installs, no configuration, no other potential headache of getting all these other ancillary pieces in place. Because that's what's more complicated about the web than the 2014-15 timeframe, when it was just, hey, right, here's an HTML text file, here's a JavaScript file, and put a script tag, and hey, look, you're up and running. Sure, you have other complexities later on with the build process and minification and what have you, but the taking away all other barriers. Click a link, start changing code inside the browser and seeing that live right there allows you to play trial and error, understand what's going on, and then you can get into growing with other things after that fact.
I mean, I saw that firsthand with last year, and then I'm probably going to see it again this year with we have a Bring Your Kids to Work. It's more like a month than a day, and it's all virtual. And so I taught some classes to, I think they were ages 10 to 17. And there was more than 20 of them in the course that I was doing. And we were using, like you're saying, like code pins and stack blitzes to live code and live edit, and they get stuck and they just send me their link. And as they update it, I'm seeing what they're updating, and they could just jump in and, all these different levels of learners, like just learning what the web is and how to create and modify within it. And so I'm right there with you, Mike, and I'm excited to see the new tools that are constantly coming out and being developed. I know it enriches our lives as developers every day, but I think they are, my brain first goes to, ooh, this is gonna be great for beginners. So
I really like that. I remember mentoring Angular girls in Kansas City, and there was somebody that showed up. When you have Angular girls and it's just like, come learn code, right? What are you going to get? Right. And I had the same experience with, gosh, I can't remember what it was, but I went and mentored a bunch of fourth graders too. And like the first thing I want to do is teach them Angular, of course, right? Because it's so easy. And, some people are just show up with their iPads. Like, what do you do with that? Right. But the way I was able to do that was by using Stack Blitz. So, and then, like committing something and then pushing it up, right? Maybe on my machine, and then letting them pull it down and then creating something. So that I wonder if the Angular documentation, though, then should change to say, hey, here's a super easy way, almost like, Justin, I know you created Angular Playground, right? But like just something super easy of like, mess around with this, do that, just to get people, instead of the like full on Angular experience that we're currently giving people.
And I think that's being done to some degree. That I know that some of the examples, there are Stack Blitz examples that will link out from the Angular documentation to Stack Blitz to run those examples to say, oh, hey, we're talking about this thing here. Here's a playground to go and play with it in.
Yeah, I think they have
but
I think they have like a shopping cart application, like in the getting started, like to try it out. Just like a small little application in Stack Blitz that you can mess around with.
Yeah, I think it was a deviation from the Tour of Heroes that was started with to be able to provide, I think, a more comprehensive slate of features within Angular.
Yeah, and I think the point, like Tracy, what you're talking about is the ability to say, how from an entry standpoint, can you help remove all the stuff around, right? So that it's not even really a discussion that you have or something that a person has to read about or start to understand. And can you just take away all the surrounding stuff and drill right down to, say, create a component, right? And that experience of the DOM and the CSS and maybe some data binding. Can you get somebody there without having to explain some of the other stuff before they get there? And if you can achieve that, then I think maybe that's where you can start to have this experience where people can take maybe what they've already started, which is learning HTML and CSS, right? And now bridge that gap to say, here's how Angular provides data binding. Because if you really think about it, I think when I think about it at the heart of it, we talk about like AngularJS and the history of things. It's about providing data binding with JavaScript to our markup to provide this logical business logic functionality so that you don't have to hand write that, stuff, right? Interaction with the DOM. And that's where Angular came in, all these other frameworks came in to solve that, Knockout JS, Ember, like all these things, right? And so from people coming in, they've learned the basics of DOM and creating the DOM interacting. And now they need to enhance that with this. And that's why we're kind of coming to Angular, these things is like, we know we need to do business logic stuff with our DOM. And so we want to look for a platform to help assist us get there. And getting them into that, I think, is maybe the heart of it. Is how do you get someone from markup to business logic and data binding? Right.
So I know it's super simple, but I really wanted to get your opinions on this. Someone in the chat, and I'm trying to find their name to give them credit for it, was talking about putting it all in one file. Where, oh yes, it was coding cat dev. Something to make a little simpler is to use string templates and inline CSS to start. so they can see everything in one spot, in my opinion. And for me, it's like a gut, like, whoa, like, because I want, first of all, like my markup and my styles, they always explode. And so it's like, it's never going to be the cute little 4 lines you see in the demos. And so for me, I'm always like, oh, I got to start out with that file. But I'm wondering, like, for the beginner aspect, for like, do you all see that is the way that we should be doing things, like for onboarding and lowering the barrier?
Well, that is just like teaching best practices. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, for example, for me, and, you know, this is a very spoiled point of view, but like, you know, I want an expert to teach me how to do it because I want to know. And I hate it when my friends like dumb down things. They're like, yeah, but like, you don't need to do that. You could do it this way for now. I'm like, no, teach me how to do it the right way, because as I grow, I don't want to learn this halfway that fine is right, but isn't going to be valid, you know, in 6 months or something like that.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish your thought.
No, go ahead.
I agree that learning best practices up front is completely valid and a good idea. But at the same time, there is something to be able to get that initial understanding of how these two pieces are playing together, that you may sit there and say, hey, we're going to put these in the same file right now just so we can see and work with it closely together. But ideally, you don't want this. This should be in its own separate file. And we'll get to that later. As long as you explain that point up front, saying we're just doing this for learning purposes. That because you need to drive home that they need to understand how those two pieces are interacting, and having that visual of seeing your template and changing a variable or even a function call with an event binding or what have you, to be able to see how those are directly interacting. And then on the right, seeing, or left, however you orient your setup, or top and bottom, whatever, to be able to see how that interaction plays out. I'm defining what it's going to look like, how it's going to be filled in, and watching it work with that same visual all at the same time is very powerful and very informative for people too.
I think you're right, but I agree with Tracy deeply. I'm being introduced to the .NET ecosystem right now, and having a JavaScript background, I'm like, okay, I can see you're safeguarding me from something. Just lay it out, man. Just like give me the good stuff. And so I think maybe it depends, like we really should be making targeted approaches to teaching of, you've never done programming before in your life, or you're trying to get into Angular, but you know other things. So, because I think both are valuable, and I would personally get annoyed at the like, what are you keeping from me?
Well, you know, like for ArcGIS, right? It's like Ben says something and he says something small and then everybody does it. And then he's just like, well, I was just using that for example purposes. Oh no. And now all of a sudden it's the way it is. Even though he said, you know, don't use this, don't use, you know, X, Y, and Z. It's just like, that's now the world. And so like having to go through correcting that is, you know, it was really painful. But I actually think it's kind of interesting too, because you think about the different entry points into people learning Angular, right? Like, for example, if you're teaching, you know, an enterprise developer who maybe has a backend background, or, you know, it comes from the .NET world or the Rails world or whatever, they want to the first thing they're going to look for is the CLI, right? Like, where's the CLI? What are you giving me? Like, what, you know, give me all my templates, everything like that. And it's interesting because for me, learning new technologies, that's the first thing I look for. Like, what? You want me to learn to new technology? Where's the CLI? If I don't have a CLI, I'm not learning it, right? Versus a lot of people who are coming in from boot camps, let's say, and the way they're introduced to JavaScript is very raw. Like, build a React component. Look how easy it is. You just built a React component. Nothing there. And so then when they go into Angular, they're like, oh my God, there's so much stuff. So it's like two very different mindsets of learning, right? Maybe Angular hasn't done, maybe Angular should be approaching or at least have some documentation somewhere to approach how like React developers are learning JavaScript or learning React generally. Maybe that's what we're missing.
Yeah. To clarify my point and take a quick step back of what we were talking about, the idea of Ben saying something and the idea of showing somebody everything in one file goes a little bit to the means of which that information is being passed out. With the one file approach of seeing that visually and working with somebody on that and explaining that, that's more like a mentor mentee type thing where you're in a one-on-one situation. You can explain why you're doing something the way you are versus here's a blog post or here's
Or a
TED
tweet,
Talk.
and then everyone takes that tweet and they digest it and they're like, use this forever.
Yeah. If your audience is like 1 to 10 people and it's real-time interactive, then you can get away with explaining something that's not best practice and people don't tend to run with it. But yeah, if you're talking about a larger audience, whether it's a conference, blog post, tweet, whatever, then I completely agree.
When I think one of the core things there, like Tracy, what you mentioned when you talk about how you learn, right? And Alyssa, how you learn, that when you see something, you want answers and you want to find those answers right away. Like your mind goes to that and that's what you want. And I think that's what, from a teaching standpoint, what you try and solve is how do you meet the needs of everybody's different learning patterns and provide that, right? And solve that puzzle. Like, for example, like Chandler, when you approach something like this, what's your thought process in going in saying, okay, I see something here. Do you want to know about other side things, at that same time? Or are you more of approaching it and like, can you just give me exactly what's here first?
Yeah, I'm kind of all over the place, I call it chasing the rabbit down the rabbit hole, and like I just branch out. So yeah, it's sometimes I'm really focused, sometimes I'm not, and that's not really a structured way of learning, and it's not usually the most efficient, but sometimes it's the most fun,
Yeah, for sure. And so like as a teacher, when I think about putting together material and I say, okay, I need to teach somebody about a template and binding to the class property in Angular, right? If I do it in line, all in that one file, then I can start explaining that right away. The minute I introduce the decorator and say that my template file is over here, my CSS file is over here, it opens the door to, I might potentially have to explain, how do those get wired up? What takes care of finding that? How does that bring that all together, right? And so now I have to make a decision as a teacher and a builder of that content of, do I go down that at this moment? And now I'm kind of going separate from what I'm focusing, trying to get them to learn, which is how to bind this input to this text field, right? And so that's really the challenge of saying, like, how do you create that material to support different people's learning, right? And maybe is that something like a choose your own adventure where you say, okay, do you want to learn it, or we just focus on here? Or do you want to focus on, this best practices way? I don't know.
But I mean, Dustin, even though I said, I want to be able to have access to that information, I don't want you to baby me. I've done your courses before and they really meshed with how I think and how I learn. And I didn't feel coddled. So I don't know how to marry the two and make sense. And maybe it's like Mike said, it's like all about the setting, right? Because I was going through a very like course, you're learning A, here's A. And I was like, oh my God, I get A. This is brilliant, right? And so maybe it is more about the setting and the context, because I didn't feel insulted by the way that you were very direct and very deliberate about how you were isolating what you were teaching. So.
I think this is also kind of what I love about, I think that everybody's always like, oh, somebody wrote about this before, oh, there's already an Angular tour of heroes, like no need to whatever. But the more content that's out there that has different perspectives helps people learn better. So like for me, when I'm learning a new technology, I'm like, okay, let me look at like 5 different articles, because which one am I going to understand? Okay, this person's too technical. Okay, this person's too high level. Okay, I found how I need to learn. So I'm always, I mean, I'm surprised. Like, for example, when I was learning Angular material, I was just like, well, I'm just going to document all the different components and put it in a blog post as a reference guide. And that has, always been a very, very popular blog post. And like, was that useful? I mean, it was useful for me, and apparently it was useful for other people too, right? So like, and it was so simple and basic. So I mean, hopefully this inspires people again. Like, if you are learning Angular, or want to learn Angular, or even if you're like creating Angular get started guides internally, those might be amazing things to share out into the public.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've always thought that as different people create all these different videos, like, well, why are you creating this? But different people explain things in different ways, at different paces, from different perspectives, and there's not always just one way to explain things. And not only you can learn individually from one of them, but I think you can learn more by watching multiple of them, and finding who suits your learning styles.
Yeah, so like what Tracy was saying, she might find 5 blog posts. I kind of do the same thing, but I'm only going to bookmark one, to like refer back to later. And then like I may create a playlist on YouTube, with all the same topic, but everybody's talking about, just different styles. But there's always that one that you kind of go back to refer to, that like you really kind of jive with.
Do you guys ever like, I did this the other day. I bought was it a Udemy course? I think it was Udemy. And literally after the first 5 minutes, I fell asleep. So like, highly encourage more courses out there.
So maybe that learning style or that delivery mechanism wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know where that.
Or you weren't in the right mindset. You may need to accept some of the blame. But to Taylor's point of bookmarking blog posts and creating YouTube playlists, both, first of all, are very good ideas to go back and be able to review things that you've learned. But it also speaks to different mediums as well. Some people learn by watching and doing hands-on. Some people learn just by reading or through discussion or different ways. So even having the different mediums or delivery mechanisms is helpful too.
Yeah, and Joe Eames kind of talks about this a little bit, but there's a difference between passive learning and active learning, right? So like if you're just watching a video and you're not, or you're even typing along and you're kind of coding along with them, you're not really going to retain as much. I think he says 15%, but it's the act of, actually getting out there into the weeds and creating your own project and using those resources as a guide. Because if you don't feel the pain of learning, if you don't fit, like if it doesn't like make you like want to throw your keyboard, you're never going to get that aha moment when it finally compiles or works.
It's like what Davey said in the chat, or you learn with errors while compiling.
What's really fascinating about this discussion, I think that's kind of revealing some stuff, is that maybe it's not so much about the thinking about the best solution for when I build this content, it should be this way, or how do you get it right? It's the idea that there's just tons of content and different ways, and people can focus on training and teaching that content in way A, way B, way C. But maybe it's more about helping people coming into it to teach them how to consume the content. Right. And the answer is really about getting people introducing to this concept. And I think it translates from not only learning, but also to development. Because when we talk about all these things, we talk about, from a development standpoint, if we as developers can digest options that are out there, and then from there make our decisions of what tools to use, how to compose that, how to make that solution. That's really, I think, ultimately where we get to a happy spot as developers is understanding what we have to work with and then crafting what fits for what we need at that point. And so the more that we can understand what's out there and take that stuff in, and maybe it's the same way here, which is, here's all these 5 different ways to start learning Angular. Now you can explore and digest them and find out this one fits. I stay awake on this one, right? Or this one sort of thing. And from there, then choose that path that fits right for you.
Yeah. And while there's all these different ways of learning and having things explained to you or with you through discussion, um, I think that I also really appreciate the way that the Angular team took a step back and looked at Tour of Heroes and said, yeah, maybe this isn't as comprehensive or is the best example or showcase to be able to walk people through the different features. But to have a common ground, a common type of application or set of features within an application that you're trying to drive towards and let other people through their means drive towards the same goal is super helpful. And the fact that there's something standard-ish like that type of application provided in the official documentation that other people can drive to is super helpful as well. Oh, I just got a comment that I'm quiet. Is that?
I know, which is really odd because you sound fine to me. Does everyone sound quiet, chat, or is it just Mike?
Because I've been playing with my microphone because I moved.
Oh, that's better.
I did turn it off. I did. I messed with my settings.
Now it's like you're right here.
Hello.
Yeah. So when we talk about like when we talk about Angular and Tour Heroes and like Angular.io, right, is the source of that material. And we talked a little bit about how that's changed over time and things like that. Do we still kind of feel, has anybody, looked at it, worked on it recently? Do we still feel like it has some stuff that could potentially increase on? We could get to a more spot like that?
I'm doing a workshop, as Tracy mentioned, and it uses the Tour of Heroes, but something fun that I did was I ripped out the heroes because I thought they were boring, and I put ponies in with like this My Little Pony API, and there's like rainbows and animations, and it's like, and or maybe it's disgusting to some people, I don't know, but I just had a lot of fun with it, and so now I kind of like build on it and work with it, and it's like my go-to example. And so with this workshop, I was like, ooh, I want to teach like how to really dive in and start refurbishing a UI comfortably in Angular. And I was like, let's use this one, and I'll let everybody kind of pick their own APIs, and they can redo it to make like theme it their own way. But as I've worked with it, it was so funny. I did at DevReach this last year, I asked a lot of Angular folks to come on and to kind of tweak this application live and to add their own thing to it. And John Papa was one of those people. And it was so funny how many things he changed in his own application. I'm like, this is your stuff, man. Like it was just amusing to me because I think, to Mike's point earlier, we have to constantly be reevaluating like what we've done in the past and reinventing and redoing, I think, just to keep it fresh. But I couldn't point out anything specific in the Tour of Heroes. Personally, I love that application. Like it just has this place for me as like, I don't know, it's been with us for so long. But I do see that there are, I guess, some things that are missing. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I think the docs team is doing a restructuring, right, of the whole learning journey, and they've been making a bunch of documentation changes already. So I'm really eager, and I can't wait to see what they're going to come up with, especially later on this year.
Yeah, it's definitely been a great source of having something there. I'm trying to remember, like going back in the day, like way back, when we had AngularJS, right, and the AngularJS doc site, and how that experience was to learn AngularJS and the things. I think it was pretty comprehensive of the documentation site, but I can't remember if they had any type of demo app. But yeah, like kind of it feels like it's been a mission from day one for Angular 2, does that make sense? For the Angular team to have some sort of, documentation around some example to get people going. And that's just evolved over time, and definitely, something great to have from the source, right? So at least somewhere you can start there, but then, from there, and then I think the Angular.io site also has links and stuff to other videos and content. So hopefully it can be this launching point for people to come in and then find other content from there that fits their needs.
Yeah. I think to close the loop on learning, there's a lot of different ways to get started. There's a lot of different ways to consume information. But to me, the way to solidify and finalize that learning process is to pay it forward and to teach and to start explaining this to other people, which will help grow the community as well, to take something that you've learned and go ahead and teach somebody else.
Yeah, it's like the doctor's mantra, you see one, you do one, then you teach one, right? So I'm always constantly thinking, like, the people that come behind me, how can I bring them forward? Like, how can I pull those people in? I started with React, and then started learning Angular, really fell in love with it. So like, how can I show people like those parts of Angular that I love, or like how can I emulate that love with them?
Yeah. So Tracy, Chandler, like, how at this dot, how do you approach when you have new developers that you're bringing in that maybe you need to ramp them up, and B, for clients that you work with, that have team members, if you do that, like, how do you get them ramped up, right? And how do you approach this training scenario or challenge in that scenario, in that case?
I think for us, it's very much, internally when we have team members, it's very much learning by doing. So working on, this dot projects, like we have a really cool one that I'm so excited to launch. It's built in Angular. Hopefully we get it's something for conferences. So I'm just like, oh my gosh, when are we going to launch this thing? And I think with at this dot, we have this very strong culture of mentorship. So everybody at this dot that we hire really likes teaching and wants to teach. It doesn't matter what level they are. So I think that's really cool, like fostering that culture of learning. But then for our clients as well, we'll host things like, hey, let's do a pairing session. Hey, let's do like lunch and learns where, we can teach people about X, right? And, helping facilitate code reviews and giving feedback. Those are ways that I feel like have been the most useful. I personally learn from other people. Like, that's how I felt really good about learning Angular. I know somebody in the comments says, I learned Angular by following popular people with Angular. And, I remember when Pascal, when the new router came out, I couldn't figure it out. There was no documentation. He's like, hopped on the phone with me for 10 minutes and helped me get the router working. And that was huge, right? So I think that's the really cool part about the Angular community as well. It, for some reason, and I think it depends on whatever, who you resonate with, right? But like, I really resonated with the Angular community when I first started, and there were so many people just willing to help.
Yeah, and I really like that when you talk about like the lunch and learn concept, and I think even that applies to what you're talking about with discovering Pascal and his mention about the router and our, the sort of things, is that those sort of moments give this opportunity to not only show something, but a lot of times I know for me as a developer, it's helping me to remember, like, oh, that's something I can do, right? Or, oh, hey, that's something I can do. I can go learn it on my own or get in the details of it. But just to be reminded or have that surface to me as a thing is a big value there. So when we talk about learning, it's not necessarily about a deep dive into it, but sometimes it's just about making awareness and discovery of that thing is there.
I really love the idea, not just of like a lunch and learn of one person going out, because the downside with lunch and learns, I've seen a lot of times where it's just one person. Hey, I want to talk about this. Hey, I want to talk about this. I want to drive this. I want to do that. And other people are just like, I want free lunch, so I'm just going to go. But I think by getting participation from more people, you have essentially a bunch of people spreading out to pull in to research all these different topics and bringing it back in and sharing that. So I think there's a lot to be said about group learning, whether or not it's 2 people, 10 people, 20 people, to be able to drive that forward of saying, hey, we're going to start our Angular journey together. And we're going to, hey, look, we'll just pair real quick and say, all right, this is how binding works. Oh, cool. All right. Well, I wonder how routing works, and I wonder how state management works. Okay. Well, one of you go out and learn about each, and come back and teach the other. Which again goes back to the idea of teaching and explaining, because that kind of solidifies, like I said, your learning process to have that assurance that you know well enough to explain it to somebody else, or at least to identify the pieces of it that you don't understand well enough that you want to go and learn more about that particular piece.
You just gave me this like brilliant idea for an event
welcome.
where it's like an escape room, but you are locked in the room until you can figure out the code, and like you and one other person get the route working, or you'll forever be in this room. No,
Alyssa, I've had to debug stuff like way into the late hours. I hope it wouldn't be something like that, because I'd need to get out of that room.
That sounds like a fun conference activity.
Right? I'm so doing this.
Although you'll find, like, okay, so when I'm in that room, I'm like, oh, this person knows clues. This person reads more books than me. All right, I'll just follow along, and I'm just kind of, and then like we get out. Was I useful? So that's going to be my learning experience if we ever do something like that.
Hey, learning by osmosis and just being around and hearing different conversations is good as well.
Oh, that is very true. Mm-hmm.
So the people who go to the lunch and learn just for the lunch, sorry, you're going to learn something too.
Yeah.
You're going to pick something up.
Very true.
Yeah. Wow. Lots of stuff, right? Lots of different ways. Super interesting just to be talking about and thinking about how we learn, right? Whether it's just people coming in new, but even, people that have been learning stuff and doing this type of stuff for a long time. I know for me, I'm always, I always want to learn. I'm always eager to know more. And so I'm constantly on a journey of learning, right? And these sort of things that we talk about in terms of digesting content and where do I find my content. And sometimes it's just about, being reminded that that's something you can do in Angular. So I should probably use that, right? All those things come into play, even for, somebody that's been around for a while that still needs to get introduced to something. Right?
I was thinking about it too. For the past year, I've kind of felt, a little dead inside. Like I think a lot of people have, but I kind of got to this point where like I was too exhausted to learn anything, right? And the way I jump started that is because is by, starting to take piano classes and take guitar classes and whatever, and just, kind of, that loop of learning. So I almost wonder if the learning journey of Angular should kind of be like that, ooh, I'm hooked, type thing. Like, oh, it's like that positive feedback loop of, it's like the same thing with TikTok, right? Or any of these other ones. Like you see something right away and it hooks you, and then you want more, and then you want more, and you want more. Maybe we're not making the learning experience addictive enough for people to like want to keep going.
Yeah,
that is a yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say it needs to be like a Netflix TV show, right? Where you watch the first episode and then you look at your clock and it's 8 hours later.
Yes.
Yeah, don't go releasing one episode at a time. I'm not about that life.
Me neither.
That's such a fascinating thought and point. Yeah, you think about, like, for me, I get excited about the shiny stuff, right? So if I see a new technology that comes out or a new way to do things, like I instantly want to learn more about it and play with it and find a reason to play with it, right? And so, yeah, like, is it when you start, the first thing we teach in Angular, could we teach something that looks like magic, right? That looks like amazing, that when you go and you type that code and you run it, that you're like, oh my gosh, I just made that happen. Like that thing is, I could totally see that missing. Like, are we just diving into something that's like, okay, well, I'm kind of doing the same thing, rendering some text or anything like that. But can you get something that's like, oh my gosh, I just made that happen. That is awesome. I want more.
Because then I think it also reinforces this idea of like you wanting to learn as well. Not just the addictive part, but like the training your brain to learn, because I know I needed, you know, piano classes to jumpstart my like desire for learning again.
And I think that that 8 hours later of going through different things is a matter of leading people down that right path. So that, all right, look, we've taught you about event binding, or to me about data binding, and then almost like the watch next episode, right? Hey, how do you get these values to change on demand? All right, well, now we're going to get into event binding.
After
Okay,
you watch
cool.
3 commercials.
Exactly. But then maybe to be able to not just drive people to learn one topic at a time, although there is value in that, especially when you're going back and trying to solve a problem, like, oh, I was working on this and it was working and now it should be working, but it's not. How do I solve that problem? To find those little nuggets in there, but also to think about the overall journey of, all right, how do we get from here? All right, we're here, and how do we go? Where do we go next? And to essentially draw that path as well would be helpful.
Yeah, Justin, just out of curiosity, what was that thing that hooked you when you were learning Angular? Like when you first saw it for the first time, and you saw it, and you're like, "Man, I got to know more." What was that thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think if I go back to it, it was, you know, AngularJS time, and we're using stuff like Knockout.js to do data binding and two-way binding into, you know, DOM elements and things like that. And the concept of single page apps and really this idea that like you want to be able to have this user application that takes that data binding to the next level. And when I think about that, I think about single page apps and the ability to route. And you're saying like, I want to change this entire experience, but I don't want to do it with the URL bar in a traditional sense of another request to the server. And so having an application framework that allowed me to do that was like kind of oh yes, I want that. And then at that time, it was actually, okay, what am I evaluating that's there? And, you know, at the time it was like AngularJS, and I'm trying to remember the other ones that were there at the time that I saw. I think maybe Ember was one of them. Yeah, so that it was that point that got me into it, right? Is that idea of the single page app and the orchestration, I guess, really from like a routing and a full, you know, transaction standpoint. Yeah.
What about you, Chandler? Because you said you came from a React world, right?
Yeah, so I got started with Angular in V8, and for me, it was lazy loading a route for the first time. So like putting load children and then like navigating in and seeing it requests for that, I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then like, you know, I just had to have more. So
that is so funny. I love it.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that too, like when for AngularJS to Angular 2 for me was the whole component concept and the ability to now say you're bundling these things up in components. Now I can start the CSS part, and then the fact that like you can isolate everything for this widget at that point was, you know, oh yes, more please.
I think for me, it was very much, you know, coming from an Ember background and having everything for me, right? There's an Ember CLI. You know, Angular is very similar to Ember. I mean, I haven't done Ember in years, but it used to be very similar to Ember. And so I just wanted something when I was learning that made me feel comfortable, right? And so I just went there. But now, since, you know, a lot of people are learning React, it's interesting because it's kind of going to the other side, right? Like, how do we make React developers feel more comfortable learning Angular?
I was gonna ask you, Tracy. I was like, you ever pull up the old Ember?
I haven't in a really, really long time. Yeah, because it's, you know, there's like too many bright, shiny things right now, right?
No, I know. My husband,
yes,
he does Swift and he does web dev, but he still has like a really big spot in his heart for Ember. And his team was recently going through the what framework we should use, and he's like the sole man in the background with his little Ember like. So hearing you say that was nice.
Yes, Ember still has a place in my heart. The Tomster, right? So it's like, how do you get people to adopt? Well, Angular obviously needs a mascot.
I was just going to say that. Yes. I was going to ask you about that. Like the whole mascot thing is awesome.
That's how I got into JavaScript. It's because I saw that I was like, that's so cute. What is that? And, I had a boyfriend wearing a shirt and he's like, oh, that's Ember. I was like, what's Ember? He's like, it's JavaScript. I was like, well, is that like Java? And then that was really when, and then, a little bit later, I decided to learn JavaScript.
Solved it. We have solved it. The whole show. How do you lower the barrier to entry? A cute mascot.
Yes. We're there.
Dare I say that what was already mentioned? Could it possibly be a pony?
No, don't. You're gonna get my hopes so high, Mike. Don't even go there.
It could be your little pony. All right, I gotta add the dad joke in there at the very end.
Oh God, you're so cute. Oh, thank you guys so much for coming on. I've learned so much, and have so many good ideas. I get conference vibes from this. So thank you. This has been such a cool episode.
It was like a hallway talk or conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It was awesome. All right, well let's do some picks. See if anybody has any picks, and then we'll call it a show. Do our panelists have any picks today? I should have asked ahead of time so then I would know, but I'm just going to ask everybody on the fly right now. Any picks?
The new Marvel show on Disney Plus launches their first episode. Not all the episodes, sorry, Alyssa, but the first episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This is out today. I haven't watched it yet, so no spoilers coming from me.
All right. Do our guests have any picks they want to share?
I have one. This is a show called Married at First Sight, but I encourage you to watch Married at First Sight Australia because it is so much more ridiculous. Like these people, I just hate the women on them. So, some of them, and I'm just like, what a terrible human being. And it's just like great. So, I mean, that was me till 2 a.m. last night.
All right. Chandler, do you have any picks or anything you want to share?
Yeah, I got one. So Lars is running a publication called This Is Learning. He's putting together a free and open source text-based RxJS content. Really cool getting it off the ground, getting a lot of people in to contribute to it. So kind of goes with our theme.
That's cool. So This Is Learning is how you find it?
Yeah, and I'll share the link to the GitHub repo.
Nice. That's very cool. Okay, and this hiring, right?
Yes, email me, tracy@this.co, or find me on Twitter @LadyLead if that was too difficult of an email address. We are hiring, and really just come hang out, right? Like we're just looking for good people to work with that we can build cool things with. And I feel like if I can wake up every day and do that, then life is amazing. But I mean, there are definitely at least 5 positions open. So now. So
Awesome. Go check it out for sure.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, hey, Tracy and Chandler, thank you so much for sharing your time, for coming on here and discussing this topic. We really appreciate having you on and you contributing your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
For sure. All right. That's a wrap, everyone. Have a good one. We'll see you next time. Later.